I want to thank Fraidy for her just kind of ferocity of purpose in this work. She shared, it was her, and then it was 2, and now it's only 4 people on her team kind of leading this work that I would hope would either inspire or shame all of us to support her mission, because no child should be married anywhere, but particularly not in the wealthiest and most powerful country that we've ever seen, and particularly not in a country that calls herself a democracy. So I just couldn't be more thankful for all of you being here this evening, and really couldn't be any more grateful to Fraidy for her leadership in this issue, and I'm here to talk about whatever she wants to talk about, listen to whatever she wants to share, and to learn alongside her and with all of you kind of for this evening and until this work is no longer relevant. So thank you, Fraidy.
Well, thank you. I mean, and what a gracious way to open by thanking me for this tremendous favor that you're doing. I was telling Chelsea before, I could yell about child marriage and forced marriage all day and nobody would really listen. But the platform that you have and the voice that you have is powerful, and the fact that you're using it as a way to raise awareness of this, I really appreciate. And then everyone here who's on the Unchained team, the Unchained board, I am so lucky. This is so deeply personal for me because of my personal experience, but the fact that there are so many other people that want to join and make this their, a focus of their days and their lives, I'm just so grateful to the Unchained board and the Unchained staff that's here, where we are a small but mighty team, and we have no slackers on the team. And then for those of you in the room who are already Unchained supporters, thank you. We obviously could not do this without you. And everyone who came out here tonight to learn more about this, thank you. We need more people opening up their eyes, opening their ears. Let's talk about child marriage in America.
So I think, Fraidy, I am grateful to know your story, but I imagine some people here may not. Maybe you could share your story with a bit more kind of detail than kind of what you laid out, but also then kind of how that propelled you kind of to where you are now. Because I think that unless we make this story personal to people, kind of the statistics may not be kind of sufficiently galling or kind of grab enough attention, but I think the painful stories hopefully will inevitably grab everyone's attention, although I wish that the fact that we've had, a couple 100,000 children married in our country in the 21st century alone would be sufficient. But I have learned that statistics, maybe in DNA, are enough to kind of, push the path forward, but that in kind of social justice work, we need not only kind of the data, but also the stories alongside it. So maybe you could share a bit more about your story, but also then how that led into your work and kind of what Unchained does today.
Yeah, sure. So I was raised in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, which, for those of you who are familiar with that community, you understand I was raised completely cut off from the outside world, no television, no radio. People are shocked when I tell them that the all-girls school that I went to in Brooklyn, I had to sign a paper in high school promising not to take driver's ed or the SATs. Those were actually forbidden. But, your marriage is arranged for you at a young age when you're in that community, and my family arranged my match pretty much right out of high school, and the stranger that they married me off to turned out to be violent, which I discovered only 1 week after my wedding. That was the first time he punched his fist through the wall in a blind rage. And a few days later was the first time he threatened to kill me, which became a common occurrence in our marriage. But 12 years until I managed to escape, because in that community I did not have reproductive rights. So I, not allowed to use birth control, required to have sex with my husband. So my first child was born 11 months after my wedding. No financial rights. I was not allowed to work or to maintain my own bank account or credit card. Limited legal rights under Orthodox Jewish law. I wasn't allowed to divorce my husband. Only he could divorce me. So it took 12 years for me to get out, and then my family shunned me. They considered me dead. And so I founded Unchained at last as a way to help other women. After I managed to rebuild my life, I wanted to help other women across the United States. So I knew there were others who were trying to say no to a forced marriage or trying to get out of a forced marriage. And the wonderful thing at Unchained is that I found I was typically able to help the women 18 or older who were calling and begging for help. And it was wonderful and healing and empowering. But then more and more girls under 18 started calling to ask for help. And what I discovered is there's almost no way to help these girls because they're not yet adults.
Maybe you could share a little bit about kind of what then that reality looks like for these girls, right? Because they can't take themselves to a shelter. They can't hide in someone's home without kind of that person who's giving them sanctuary kind of being possibly held legally liable for kidnapping them. I mean, kind of maybe just talk a little bit more specifically about kind of what does it mean when you can't help yourself, and what kind of constraints not only you but others who may want to help you face.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming to think about the obstacles that are in front of a girl. I say a girl because almost all the children who marry in the United States are girls married to adult men. And so for a girl who's not yet 18, and by the way, that includes a 17-year-old who's turning 18 tomorrow. If you're still 17, you are not an adult in any U.S. state. In every state in the U.S., you become an adult either at 18 or older. And so if you leave home, in most states, if you leave home before you're 18, you are considered a runaway. The police will search for you. They'll bring you back home. In some states, they could charge you with a status offense for leaving. So if your family is planning to force you into a marriage, you can't even open the door and leave legally if you're not yet an adult. Now, if we as advocates help a child to leave, we could be charged criminally for helping. And that actually happened in one of the cases that we worked on. We helped a 14-year-old girl to escape. One of her volunteers was charged criminally for her part in that. If we are willing to take that chance that we're going to be charged with a crime, and these girls are willing to take the chance that they'll be dragged back home and charged with a status offense, there's nowhere for these girls to go. Domestic violence shelters across the U.S. will not take in anybody under the age of 18 because there are all kinds of liability issues. Children before they're 18, typically our contracts with them are voidable, or in some states they're not even allowed to enter into a contract. So what happens if they try to retain an attorney? The retainer agreement is either voidable or they're not even allowed to enter into it. So there's almost no way for them to get legal representation. And then they're not allowed to bring a legal action in their own name typically before the age of 18, which means if their parents force them to marry, the only way they can file for a divorce or an annulment is if the same parents file for them.
Which creates this really perverse situation where girls can be married but not file for a divorce.
We like to say it puts the lock in wedlock. Yeah.
More pithily said, but more memorable. One of the reasons I think this is so important is because we spend now a lot of time and attention kind of in the girls and women space looking at child marriage around the world. Banning child marriage is one of the areas of focus for the Sustainable Development Goals. And so it's something that is getting kind of more, not only attention paid to it, but kind of resources marshaled toward efforts around the globe to end child marriage in different countries. And as we were talking about kind of before dinner, the fact that child marriage is still legal in this country, I think should say to all of us, we still have serious work to do here at home, but also really undermines our credibility then as an advocate on the world stage for the rights of girls and women.
Yeah, it's absolutely undermining efforts around the world to end child marriage. The fact that the United States, where a lot of the organizations working to end child marriage in other countries are based, the fact that it's legal here, they're getting a lot of pushback. Those people, I've heard from people on the ground in other countries who are trying to end child marriage there, and they're saying, they're getting, well, but it's legal in your country. But here's the other crazy thing. The U.S. State Department has called marriage before 18 a human rights abuse. And a couple of years ago, the State Department put out its strategy for empowering adolescent girls. and it listed ending child marriage globally as a key strategy for empowering adolescent girls. And yet this human rights abuse that our foreign policy is let's eradicate this around the globe is legal in all 50 states. The federal government also allocates approximately $11 million a year toward ending child marriage elsewhere around the globe. We recognize this as an issue, but it's this like American exceptionalism. Somehow it's not a problem if it's happening here.
And I think to circle back to kind of the previous point, Fraidy, that it's legal everywhere, partly because of all of the loopholes that exist, even in places where ostensibly you're not allowed to get married before 17, but kind of if your parents sign off on it, you can. Whereas we often know it's the parents who are forcing their children to get married, and I think that it's because we know kind of the pattern of exploitation that has been kind of legitimated often kind of in states where laws even have been passed that is so clearly kind of has led you, and I certainly strongly agree with this, to a place where we have to have an outright ban. Right? You can't have like an asterisk or an escape hatch because we know that kind of too many girls in their lives and their potential otherwise will be, once again, like wrested away from them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. When you look at the estimated 248,000 children married in the U.S. between 2000 and 2010, we know that almost every state already sets the marriage age as 18, but there are loopholes in every state. Those 250,000 children were married under the loopholes. So it's the loopholes that are endangering children. So when legislators now in state after state where they're trying to pass legislation, they're saying, well, but we need exceptions and we need loopholes. That's what we need to eliminate. It's under those loopholes that girls are being subjected to a human rights abuse.
And there are a lot of people in this room who know a lot more about the law than I do, including Fraidy and certainly our kind of esteemed hosts here at White and Case. But I think one of the other challenges in this issue in particular is that while marriages are kind of under the purview of respective states, right, marriages in one state are recognized in another state in our country. And so we also now have kind of a litany of like tragically perverse stories of girls who are taken by their kind of older fiancés, or even more frequently by their parents, to states where there are more permissive laws just to be married in, say, Missouri, and then, taken back home. And so she's been truly enchained in one place, but now has to kind of live under that restriction at home, which is why this has to have a national effort.
Right, which is why we have to pass legislation in all 50 states. Good thing I don't need to sleep a lot. But unfortunately, I mean, we wish the federal government could pass a child marriage ban, and unfortunately, it just does not seem to be possible. If any of the brilliant legal minds in this room could come up with some way to do that, that would be great. But we are working with federal legislators who are interested in doing something, and one of the things that we have thought that would help, while the federal government can't pass a ban on child marriage, what it can do is give an incentive to states to eliminate marriage before 18 without any exceptions. And we're hoping that the federal government will do that. Additionally, there is also federal law that needs to be changed. There's also a significant loophole under federal law where there is no minimum age right now to petition for a foreign spouse or fiancé or to be the beneficiary of a spouse or fiancé visa. So you have to be 21 if you want to petition for a parent, but you want to petition for a husband and you're 8 years old? Sure, go ahead. And then he gets his U.S. visa. And a lot of these girls, I mean, that's one of the primary reasons that we've seen that girls in the U.S. are forced to marry is for immigration. They're being trafficked for their U.S. citizenship. So the federal government needs to close that loophole.
Yeah, and I think something that is also an important kind of part of just the historical context is, one of the main reasons why, particularly Elizabeth Cady Stanton, pushed so hard for suffrage and for women's rights is because she wanted women to be able to determine when they got married, right? So kind of agency in marriage has been a kind of propelling force for women's rights in our country, for 150 years, and yet we still have not protected actually a woman's right to determine kind of when she will be married, because you're not actually able to make that decision at 14 or 15, particularly not if you know kind of your livelihood and your life depends on doing what your parents or your community are telling you have to do.
And at 16, at 17, same thing.
Exactly right.
And especially since, the way that child marriage works across the U.S., these children can't enter into these marriages on their own. It typically has to be a judge or a parent. So, I mean, children are pretty much completely disempowered through this process.
Well, I know that we have only 10 minutes left, and as much as I could just sit here and completely dominate Fraidy's time, I want to give anyone who may want to ask either of us a question the chance to do so. And while you don't strike me as a retiring group, if no one raises their hand, I'm happy to just continue having this conversation in front of all of you. But if you do, yes, ma'am.
So my question is this, whether it is in the Jewish Orthodox community or the Islamic community that the same things are going on, if you talk to the rabbis, they will tell you that this is
That's a really good question. If for anyone who didn't hear, is what about religions where this is practiced or traditions? So first of all, I have to say I don't know of any religion that requires child marriage. I don't know if anyone in the room knows of a religion that requires child marriage. I certainly don't know of any. Unfortunately, sometimes it is done in the name of God, but there's, unfortunately, the way people interpret religion is not always the way it was meant to be interpreted. But beyond that, what I say, and this is something that I said to Governor Chris Christie when he vetoed the first bill that to end child marriage that passed in the United States, was in New Jersey last year, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, and Governor Christie conditionally vetoed it. And he said, well, this is going to interfere with religious customs in our state. So I wrote an op-ed in the Star-Ledger the next day, and I, first of all, publicly called on Governor Christie to name a single religion that requires child marriage. To date, he has not responded. But I also said, Governor Christie, let's say you found some wackadoo cult that sacrifices a virgin every Wednesday and marries off all its children at 12 years old. Still, this legislation is entirely constitutional and logical because the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld legislation that incidentally forbids an act required by religion, as long as the laws don't target religious practice, which this legislation does not. Beyond that, I should say that almost every religion has come out in support of legislation to end child marriage. There are some exceptions. There are some religious groups in 2 states that I can think of, one of them being New York, that did oppose the bill, that did oppose the legislation. They did so kind of quietly behind the scenes, because I guess it's embarrassing to come out and say, no, we need child marriage and let's marry off all our kids. But for the most part, religious leaders from many different religions have come out in support of ending child marriage.
And the greatest number of children married in our country are nominally Christian, right? So
I'm sorry?
Like the greatest number of children married in our country are nominally Christian.
We don't have the data on that, unfortunately, because the number that we got was from marriage license data, which the data that we got did not include identifying information about the children married, so we don't know. But based on the calls that we get from girls, we get calls from children, well, girls and women, from every major religion, minor religions, secular backgrounds. I mean, this is not limited to any one culture or religion.
Yay, we're all prosecuted and persecuted and disempowered equally.
Most states already set the marriage age at 18. So all it is going through and eliminating those loopholes, eliminate the ridiculous loopholes that are, in many cases really archaic, written in a completely different time. And, in 8 states, for example, still have a pregnancy exception to the marriage age, under which girls can be forced to marry their own rapists. I mean, thank goodness states have been moving away from that. But Very simple. Just go through and eliminate the loopholes, leave the marriage age at 18, or in states where the age of majority, the age of adulthood is higher, make that age, whatever age you become an adult, that's the age that you should be allowed to get married. But the pushback that we've gotten is, unfortunately, in state after state, legislators have either rejected the legislation and said, no, thank you, I don't want to eliminate a human rights abuse that destroys girls' lives, or they've watered it down. So, yeah, we'll take out this exception, but we'll put in the other one and the other one and that one. And then, we're the ones who get the calls from the girls. The day after the law passes, we get those calls. Now the girls under the new loopholes are being forced to marry. We've already had legislation watered down or rejected in, 23 states? But good news, just today, there was a Senate committee in Delaware that passed the bill. It's already passed in the House, the lower house in Delaware, and now a Senate committee approved the bill, so the full Senate is going to vote on it probably tomorrow. And thank you. So that's why our director of policy isn't here today, because she's in Dover testifying, and then I'm headed out there early in the morning for the Senate session. So let's hope we have some good news out of Delaware tomorrow. In New Jersey, the bill that Governor Christie, America's most hated governor, vetoed last year, it was reintroduced, even more bipartisan support than last year, and it already passed in the Senate a few weeks ago, and we're hoping that an Assembly committee will consider it as soon as next week. And so we might soon have 2 states that take the wild, crazy step of ending child marriage in year 2018. So Liz has been on the phone with me several times when I had to drop everything and run to the airport. One of the primary services that we provide at Unchained is coordinating escapes for women and girls who are either facing an impending forced marriage or have already been forced into a marriage and are trying to get out. And sometimes there's an international component to that, because in many cases, I think it's ironic. I think a lot of parents don't realize that child marriage is legal in the U.S., so they take their kids overseas to force them to marry there. And I don't want to tell them. You could actually just go down the street to the clerk's office and do it there. When there's an international case, we work with the U.S. State Department to help rescue these girls and these women. And as you can imagine, these are some really high stakes rescues. And so we coordinate with the State Department. We pay for their tickets, and then when they come back to the U.S., we go pick them up from the airport. We get with security, because we never know when a family is going to be waiting for us. And actually, in one case, there was a family waiting. And then get them into a domestic violence shelter. But again, remember, when they're not yet 18, almost none of these options are available. And that's, it becomes this terrible trap, this hellish trap, where these girls feel the only way out is death, and many of them try to kill themselves. With the LGBTQ piece, unfortunately, one of the reasons we've seen that parents will force a minor or adult child to marry is to control sexuality. So if a child comes out as gay, we've seen parents try to fix that by marrying the child off and saying, no, you're not gay, you're not bisexual, you're not transgender. I'll prove this to you. I'll marry you off.
Just in case you thought this couldn't get any more infuriating, but what more can the rest of us do to support your work? Clearly, kind of with financial resources, but also what can we do with non-financial resources, connecting the people we know in different states so that they're educated voters and advocates, citizens, to the earlier question. Kind of, do you need our help raising kind of the profile on something specific? Would it be helpful if kind of more people come to New Jersey what just like very concrete things kind of would you like us to take away from this as what you need and what we can at least try to do to help you meet those needs?
Well, I really appreciate your asking that, and I appreciate everybody who's here in the room today, and everybody who wants to help. I mean, there's so much work to do, but it starts with just legislators right now feel comfortable just saying, no, I don't want to pass this bill. I don't want to end child marriage. And what we need to do is we need to let them know that's not okay. Here in New York, for example, I helped to write a really strong bill that would have set the marriage age at 18. And the first time the bill was introduced, it just died. There were legislators just said, I don't even want to vote on this. And then when the sponsor of the bill was introducing it for the second time, she said, listen, it's not moving at 18, so we have to make it 17. And I said, well, how is that helping? Most of the children who marry in the U.S., including here in New York, are 17. In my former community, 17-year-old girls are being forced into a marriage, not only raped on their wedding night, but somebody comes over on their wedding night and shaves off all their hair under their wig. Why are we even bothering to pass legislation if we're throwing the girls who need the most protection under the bus and not protecting them? But that's how the bill passed. So we need to let legislators here in New York know that's not okay. We're not accepting that. If you won't end child marriage, we'll replace you with a legislator who will end child marriage. We need to let them know. And Governor Cuomo, who stood up at the bill signing and announced that New York just ended child marriage. We need to let him know, no, you didn't. That's first of all. And second of all, you need to do that. You didn't end child marriage. What you did is you reduced child marriage. You shifted child marriage. You didn't end child marriage. And you need to do that. And we need to do that in states across the U.S. So, again, if you go to unchained.last.org, you can learn more about this issues. Even something as simple as, tweeting about this, sharing what we have. Sarah is on social media. She coordinates all our social media platforms. Share it, like it, let people know. Talk to people about this. We also organize at Unchained. We've invented a unique form of protest where we call it a chain-in. We gather a group of us in bridal gowns and veils. We provide the bridal gowns and veils. And we chain our wrists and tape our mouths to show legislators this is what life looks like for a girl or a woman who's forced to marry. So join a chain-in. We have 2 chain-ins coming up, one in Philadelphia on May 12th, another one on the Jersey Shore on July 21. Join a chain-in. On our website, you could also submit emails to your legislator. And if you're in a state that has introduced legislation, even if the legislation has died or been watered down, like in New York, you can submit an email to your legislator saying, this isn't okay. We need to do better.
So we can all play our part.
Yeah, we need to make noise. If we all get together and tell legislators, we're not accepting this. We're going to stand in a bridal gown and chains until you do something about this. We can make it happen. We just need to make some noise.
Well, Fraidy, you're clearly making a lot of noise, thankfully. And you're making a lot of noise very effectively. And I hope all goes well in Delaware tomorrow. And I hope all goes well in New Jersey in the next couple weeks. And I hope that momentum carries us all forward, because I don't want my daughter or my son growing up in a country that thinks it's okay if any child anywhere is ever married. So thank you for trying to help make that a reality for them and every young person across the United States. Please just give Fraidy and Unchained a round of applause. Thank you.
And please give Chelsea a round of applause. Yeah.